On the night of February 1st, 1959, 9 experienced hikers died in the Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union under circumstances that have never been fully explained. They were not beginners. They were not unprepared. They were experienced mountaineers who had done this many times before. They had the right equipment. They had a clear route. They had everything they needed. And yet something happened on that mountain that caused all 9 of them to die in ways that made no sense to anyone who investigated it. Their tent was cut open from the inside. They were found scattered across the mountainside in temperatures of -30 degrees. Some were wearing almost no clothing. Some had injuries that could not be explained by a fall or an avalanche. One was missing her tongue. 2 had fractured skulls. Several had broken ribs with a force that investigators compared to a car crash. And nobody, not the Soviet investigators at the time, not the Russian government investigators who reopened the case decades later, not the dozens of researchers, journalists, and scientists who have studied it since, has ever been able to fully explain what happened. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident, the greatest unsolved mystery in the history of mountaineering, and one of the most disturbing unsolved cases in the world. To understand what happened on that mountain, we need to start at the beginning, with the people who died there, because they were not random victims. They were remarkable young men and women whose story deserves to be told properly. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov. He was 23 years old, a student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute in the city of Sverdlovsk, now known as Yekaterinburg, in the Soviet Union. Dyatlov was an experienced hiker and skier who had organized and led multiple expeditions into the Ural Mountains. He was known for his meticulous preparation and his calm leadership. His fellow students trusted him completely. The other members of the group were Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22, one of 2 women on the expedition, and a highly experienced hiker. Lyudmila Dubinina, 20, the other woman, a passionate mountaineer who had already completed several difficult expeditions. Rustem Slobodin, 23, an engineer with extensive hiking experience. Yuri Doroshenko, 21, a close friend of Dyatlov. Georgy Krivonishenko, 23, an engineer who had worked on the construction of the first Soviet nuclear power plant. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, 23, another experienced hiker. Alexander Zolotarev, 37, the oldest member of the group and a veteran hiker and the ski instructor who had joined at the last minute. And Yuri Yudin, the only member of the group who survived. He turned back early due to illness and was never able to stop wondering what would have happened if he had stayed. The group set out on January 23, 1959. Their goal was to reach the summit of Otorten, a mountain in the northern Urals. The route was rated as Category 3, the highest difficulty level for Soviet hiking expeditions at the time. It was ambitious, but these were experienced people. They were prepared for it. The early days of the expedition went well. Yudin turned back on January 28th when his joints became too painful to continue. The remaining 9 pushed on. They were making good progress. On the night of February 1st, they set up camp on the slopes of a mountain called Kholat Syakhl. The name in the local Mansi language means Dead Mountain. They chose this campsite for practical reasons. They were making a traverse across the mountain, and camping on the slope made navigational sense. They dug into the snow and set up their large canvas tent. They ate dinner. They prepared for sleep. And then something happened. Something so terrifying that all 9 of them cut their way out through the side of the tent, the side away from the entrance, meaning they could not or would not use the door, and fled into the darkness and the -30-degree cold, wearing almost nothing. No shoes, no coats, in some cases almost no clothing at all. They ran down the slope away from their tent, away from their food, away from their equipment, away from everything that could have kept them alive. They did not survive the night. When the search party found the tent on February 26th, almost a month after the group had died, the scene was immediately strange. The tent was intact except for the cuts in the side. Inside, they found all the group's equipment, their food, their shoes, their warm clothing. Everything was there. Everything was in order, except the 9 people who should have been inside were gone. The first bodies were found relatively quickly. Krivonischenko and Doroshenko were discovered near the remains of a fire at the edge of a nearby forest, about 1.5 miles from the tent. They were wearing only their underwear. They had clearly tried to build a fire but had been unable to maintain it. They had died of hypothermia. Then Dyatlov himself was found about 300 meters from the fire, as if he had been trying to crawl back to the tent. Then Slobodin, then Kolmogorova. All 3 were found between the fire and the tent in positions that suggested they had been trying to return to it and had collapsed and died from the cold. These 5 deaths, while tragic, were at least comprehensible. People who flee into extreme cold without adequate clothing in a state of panic will die of hypothermia. It is terrible, but it is understandable. But then came the other 4 bodies, and nothing about them was understandable. The remaining 4, Dubinina, Zolotarev, Thibaut Brignol, and Kolovatov, were found in May when the snow finally melted. They were in a ravine about 75 meters from the tree where the first bodies had been found. And the injuries on these 4 bodies were what turned this tragedy into one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. Thibaut Brignol's had severe skull damage, not a surface wound, deep, catastrophic fractures to his skull that would have been immediately fatal. Dubinina and Zolotarev both had multiple broken ribs, not 1 or 2, multiple fractures on both sides of the rib cage. The Soviet forensic examiner who examined the bodies said that the force required to cause these injuries was comparable to being struck by a car at high speed. But there were no external wounds, no bruising on the skin that corresponded to the internal injuries. Whatever had caused these devastating internal traumas had done so without leaving marks on the outside of the body, and Dubinina was missing her tongue and her eyes. The soft tissue of her face had been removed. The investigators noted this. They could not explain it. The Soviet investigation concluded that the hikers had died from a compelling natural force. It was the vaguest possible conclusion. What natural force? The report did not say. The case was classified. The files were sealed. The families of the victims were told very little. The area around Dyatlov Pass, as it came to be known, named after the group's leader, was closed to hikers for 3 years, and the mystery sat there, sealed in Soviet archives, talked about in whispers, known to the families and the investigators and almost nobody else, until the Soviet Union collapsed. When the USSR fell apart in 1991 and archives began to be opened, the Dyatlov Pass incident slowly became known to the wider world. Researchers gained access to the investigation files. Photographs emerged, testimonies were published, and the world began to grapple with one of the strangest unsolved cases in history. The theories that have been proposed over the decades are extraordinary in their variety. An avalanche was long considered the most likely explanation. A sudden wall of snow could have caused the group to flee in panic and could potentially account for some of the crushing injuries. But the slope where they camped was not considered avalanche-prone. No evidence of an avalanche was found, and the pattern of the bodies, scattered over such a wide area, does not fit neatly with avalanche scenarios. A military or government experiment gone wrong has been suggested. The Soviet Union was conducting various weapons tests, in the Ural region during this period. Some researchers have pointed to the presence of orange or brown discoloration on some of the clothing, detected later as potentially consistent with radiation or chemical contamination. 2 of the bodies did show elevated radiation levels when tested. The Mansi people, the indigenous inhabitants of the northern Urals, were initially suspected. The area around Kholat Syakhl was considered sacred by some Mansi communities, but investigators found no evidence of any Mansi involvement, and the Mansi people who were interviewed had no knowledge of what had happened. Infrasound, low-frequency sound waves that can be produced by wind passing over certain mountain formations, has been proposed as a cause. Infrasound at certain frequencies can cause extreme psychological distress, panic, visual disturbances, and a feeling of overwhelming dread. Could a natural infrasound event have caused the group to flee in blind panic? Katabatic winds, sudden violent downslope winds that can occur in mountain environments, have been suggested as causing a sudden tent collapse that panicked the group. Ball lightning, secret weapon tests, UFOs, the theories go on and on. None of them fully explains everything. All of them leave questions unanswered. The Russian government reopened the investigation in 2019. After more than a year of work, they announced their conclusion. A small avalanche or a snow slab had caused the group to flee, and the deaths were the result of hypothermia and injuries sustained in the chaos of the evacuation. Most researchers who have studied the case did not find this conclusion satisfying. The crushing internal injuries without external marks, the missing tongue, the radiation, the orange skin discoloration, none of these were adequately addressed. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains officially unsolved in any way that satisfies the evidence. Yuri Yudin, the only survivor, the man who turned back, lived with the weight of this mystery for the rest of his life. He visited the pass. He studied the files. He spent decades trying to understand what had taken his friends. He died in 2013 without ever finding an answer. 9 experienced hikers, one night on a mountain called Dead Mountain, no survivors, no explanation. Whatever happened on Kholat Syakhl on the night of February 1st, 1959, it has never been explained. It may never be explained. The mountain kept its secret then. It is keeping it still. The Dyatlov Pass incident, the greatest unsolved mystery in the history of mountaineering, and a reminder that some questions, no matter how hard we look, simply have no answers.